Hi, I'm Bill Fretz, and I'd like to introduce you to our new tools. The new tools are a larger version of our earlier pieces. This is the holder for the original, and this is the holder for the new. What makes them interesting, though, is the new tools also fit in the old holder. What the new tools do is extend the capability of our original set of tools by allowing you to make larger pieces. The first group of tools, this was pretty much the limit of what you could make. The new tools let you make larger pieces because the curves are larger. They're concave, convex, tapered. They let you make small pieces of hollowware, and we're going to demonstrate some of the techniques that make them really interesting. First project we're going to make is a concave bracelet, and it was formed in a closed manner and then cut open. The extreme raising was possible because the curves of the stakes allowed the curve to form, plus the overhang on the stake allowed the shape not to interfere with either your stump or your workbench. We're going to form this bracelet from this size stock. This is a brass tube. It is made from cartridge brass. It is 70% copper, 30% zinc. It is very malleable and it is an excellent choice for jewelry making. We're going to keep it in the solid shape until the last step because the forming is much easier. We're only going to use one stake for the whole process. This concave stake will allow us both to form the piece and also to planish it. We're going to put pen lines on the piece as a reference line so you have an accurate spot to hammer. By just putting a few lines on, it makes it easier to keep the piece symmetrical as you're hammering. If you raise the pen ever so slightly, you get still a quite accurate line. It really doesn't matter at what height these lines are, as long as they're symmetrical. You have a choice of hammers for sinking a project. Now this raising is sinking because you're moving the metal down to the stake. And we're going to do it in different steps. Each step is called a course. So after we've hammered the surface completely once, it's called a course. And this will probably take 3 courses to raise the metal down to the full concave shape. We could use a steel hammer, and if we do that, we have the potential of stretching the metal. It is much safer to use a nylon hammer. This hammer has a lot of different inserts. The 7 different inserts have different curves. So by matching the curve of the insert to the curve of the stake, it makes it more accurate in forming the piece, and it keeps the piece from becoming wavy as you're forming it. We'll place the piece on the stake. Now you'll notice we're using this end because it allows the piece to flow freely as we work on it. We're going to start on the edge, and we're going to hammer the 2 edges and then move to the middle. We are not going to move the metal down in one course because the metal will become too stressed. And you don't want to raise too much or the piece will become too wavy and there's a tendency for it to crimp, and if that happens, it's really a disaster because then you won't be able to correct it. We're going to start by rotating the piece as we hammer it. Now you'll notice the metal is moving down, but there are no marks, and that's because the nylon barely dents the metal at all. Now we're going around. The reason we're rotating around is we're keeping the piece round. If we danced around, it would get really wobbly and you wouldn't be able to control the forming. Now we're going to reverse it. Now as you hammer, the metal becomes work hardened. And as it becomes work hardened, it gets harder and harder to hammer. And that's why we're going to have to anneal it after we've hammered the middle down. Now I'm actually not hammering very hard. It doesn't take very much force to move the metal. Now I'm moving toward the middle, and I'm using the lines as a reference so I keep the piece symmetrical. Now I work from the other side. And then we go to the middle. Now you'll notice I'm using the stake in such a way that there's a line running through it. My hammer and my arm are in the continuous line, and that way I'm not coming in from an angle. Okay, that's about as far as I can go in the first course. And after it's been annealed, we'll continue the process. We've now annealed the piece, and we've replaced the marker lines on the piece. The marker lines actually are useful in that they act as a heat indicator when you're annealing. When the lines burn off, you're usually very close to the correct temperature for annealing. Now we're going to start again from the edges, and we're going to move the piece down. Each step will drive the metal closer to the stake. And on this raising, we should be able to complete the raising. Now we're going to reverse the piece and come in from the other side, and we're going to leave the lump in the middle for the last compression. The final row that we're going to hammer is the middle, and as it forms a lump, we're going to compress that metal down and form the full shape. Now this middle metal is actually compressing and thickening because it has nowhere to go, so it actually gets a little bit thicker. It's not very noticeable on small pieces, but on a big piece you would notice it. You could actually really feel the difference as you're compressing it. It would take more force. Now after we've moved the metal down, there are lumps, and we're going to go back and work those down so the piece is as smooth as we can make it with this hammer. You'll notice the piece has stayed round, and that's because there are two curves to the stake. One, this curve right here, if you continue it, would be a little bit smaller than a 2-inch circle, and that's why it fits. This curve is the one that's giving it the dynamic concave shape. We're now going to switch to a steel hammer after we've annealed it. We're now going to switch to a steel hammer that is a cross peen hammer, and it would allow us to planish the piece smooth. I've replaced the lines, and this time we're going to start in the middle. And what we're doing is we're smoothing the metal out and moving it to the edges as it's getting smoother and smoother. It's very important that the hammer blows overlap and continue in one area until we've completed a complete circumnavigation of the piece. And I'm holding the hammer very lightly. This is not a strong blow, it's very light. And I'm letting the hammer bounce off the stake. It is not a strong blow, it is a relaxed stroke. Now I've reached the beginning. I'm going to move to the next area, and I'm going to continue the blows. And as I'm doing this, the curve is actually being refined. In other words, it's not rippling. It will just have hammer blows, but it will lose any lumpiness that it had. It may look like I'm rotating. I would urge you to try to form a habit of coming straight down. That would probably be a better technique. If you try to hit it and stroke it, nothing's going to happen. It is a straight down blow that you're trying to achieve. Now I find as the piece, I get closer to the edge, I rotate it up, and it makes it easier for me to strike the metal. This stake is designed so this curve is a radius, so it's the same no matter where you're striking. So you can rotate it and still get the same curve. Very important to try to hit with a uniform blow so each blow has the same amount of force. Whatever you start with, stay with that amount of pressure, because that way the blows will be similar. I'm now going to thicken the edge by hammering the edge of the metal and coining it or upsetting it. I'm also using a urethane pad because it keeps the metal from being hurt. After I flip it over and do the other side, I don't want this side to be obliterated. And if you do it on steel, it will be. And if you do it on wood, there's a tendency your workbench will slowly just disintegrate. So urethane is a very good choice. It has no memory. You can hit it many times and it will last a long time. I'm coming in directly on the edge with a steel hammer, and I'm hitting at right angles to the edge. Since the edge is turning out, I'm coming in at an angle, but I'm trying to hit it so it hits it square. This does two things. It textures the edge and also thickens it a little bit. A thick edge is really quite interesting. Now I'm going to go all the way around and then repeat it on the other side. If you use different hammers, you're going to get different textures, and that's part of the appeal. You have a wide choice of finishes. So the combination of the hammer selection and the stake selection determines what the piece will look like. Flip it over and repeat it. So that completes the forming process. Now we're going to cut it open, polish it, roll the edges, and you'll have a finished piece. Now this circle of 2 inches will give a bracelet of the average size. If you don't have tubing, you could take a straight piece of sheet metal, wrap it around, and solder it. The interesting thing about a concave bracelet is the starting inside diameter more or less remains the same. There's a major difference though if you do a convex shape. If you do a convex shape, as the metal curves, the donut hole in the middle gets smaller and smaller, so you're going to need a larger piece of metal. We used a different stake on this piece. It was a domed piece, and basically we have a Nakim ring from this size. This is a group of tools that is going to expand, and it's interchangeable, and it is the tool group that I have actually always wanted, and I think you're going to find it really interesting too. And it just lets you expand and make more pieces with more variables than previously possible. And thank you for watching.